They say the sea holds secrets, darker than any forest, and in the quiet of the night, if you listen closely, you can almost hear the whispers of those secrets in the crashing waves. But I didn't believe in legends until I saw it myself. It was supposed to be a simple journey. A group of friends and I had set out on a boat trip along the coast. Nothing too far, just enough to break away from our busy lives. The sky was clear, the water calm, perfect, or so we thought. As the sun began to set, casting a haunting red glow over the horizon, something appeared, barely visible at first, a shadow far in the distance, just a silhouette floating with the current. But as we got closer, the shadow took shape. A ship, a massive, ancient-looking vessel, barely held together as if it had been drifting for centuries. Its mast was broken, and its sails, tattered and darkened by time, flapped weakly in the breeze. It looked abandoned, completely lifeless, and yet it wasn't on any maps, and nobody could remember hearing of a shipwreck in these waters. One of my friends, Sam, he's the type who loves a good scare, dared us to board it. Just for a quick look around, he said, a story to tell later. We laughed it off, but there was something unsettling about that ship. It felt wrong, like it was waiting for us. But curiosity got the better of us. One by one, we climbed aboard. As soon as my feet hit the deck, I felt it, a cold that seeped through my skin, chilling me to the bone. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of salt and decay, and then the silence. Absolute oppressive silence. No creaking of wood, no waves lapping against the hull, just silence. It was like the ship was holding its breath. The further we ventured into the ship, the darker it became. Sam tried to joke, but even he couldn't hide the tremor in his voice. Every step echoed, and in that empty space, every sound felt like it could wake something lurking in the shadows. The hallways seemed endless, winding and twisting in ways that shouldn't be possible on a ship this size. It was almost as if the walls themselves were shifting, guiding us deeper and deeper into its heart. I started to feel trapped, like the ship was swallowing us whole. Then we found the crew quarters, rows of bunks, untouched by time but covered in dust thick enough to choke on. And the strangest part, each bed had a journal, left open to a specific page, like the crew had vanished in the middle of reading. My friend Sarah, the bravest of us, picked one up and began to read. Her voice wavered as she spoke of haunting phrases scrawled on the page, words like cursed, no escape, and the voices, they're getting louder. That's when we heard it, a faint whisper. At first we thought it was the wind, but it grew louder, becoming more distinct, like a voice calling from the depths. We froze, trying to listen, but the words were impossible to make out. They were layered, overlapping in a language I'd never heard before. My heart raced. It felt like the whispers were watching us, surrounding us. Suddenly, Sam shouted. His flashlight had caught something, a handprint. Not just any handprint, though. It was smeared in a dark, sticky substance that looked alarmingly like blood. And it was fresh. Panic started to set in. We scrambled to find an exit, but the ship seemed to shift around us. Hallways that had been clear were now blocked by doors that hadn't been there moments before. The walls seemed closer, almost like they were closing in. The whispers grew louder, urgent, as if they were warning us or urging us to stay. I'll never forget the feeling of dread that washed over me then. This wasn't just an abandoned vessel. It was alive, and it didn't want us to leave. Then, just as suddenly as they started, the whispers stopped. Complete silence once again. But this time, it felt worse, like the calm before a storm. We stumbled upon what looked like the captain's quarters. In the center of the room stood a massive, weathered map. It was marked with strange symbols, circles drawn around places I'd never heard of. And in the corner of the room, a figure, a shadow, stood watching us. I swear it was there. A figure dressed in tattered clothes, eyes hollow, like it had been waiting for us. Sarah screamed, breaking the silence, and we bolted. But the ship wasn't letting us go so easily. Doors slammed shut, blocking our escape, and the floorboards groaned as if they were alive. We could feel it, the ship's anger, like it was punishing us for intruding. The walls closed in, and for a moment, I thought that would be the end. But then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The doors opened, and there it was. The deck, the open sea, freedom. We didn't hesitate. We ran for our boat. But as we climbed back on, I made the mistake of looking back. And there, on the deck, stood that shadowy figure, watching us as we sped away. I'll never forget its eyes, cold, empty, and filled with an ancient rage. Since that night, I haven't been able to sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I hear those whispers, calling me back. And I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, waiting. So tell me, if you saw an abandoned ship out at sea, would you dare to board it? And if you had, would you have come back? Let us know in the comments, and make sure you've liked the video if you're as intrigued as I am. After we returned to shore, I thought the nightmare was over. We tried to laugh it off to convince ourselves that it was just our minds playing tricks. But each one of us knew, deep down, that what we had seen was real. That ship wasn't just abandoned. It was cursed, haunted by something dark and ancient. And somehow, it had marked us. It started the next night. I woke up to a strange sound, a soft humming that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. At first I thought it was the wind, but then I recognized it, the same whispering we had heard on the ship, faint but unmistakable. My heart pounded as I lay there, frozen, listening to those ghostly voices filling the silence of my room. The whispers grew louder each night, and I began to feel a pull, a deep, instinctual urge to go back. It was as if the ship was calling me, reaching out through the darkness, drawing me back to its cursed hold. I tried to ignore it, but it became harder with each passing day. One by one, my friends began experiencing the same thing. Sam couldn't sleep, haunted by visions of the handprint on the wall, the bloody smears that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Sarah started seeing shadows in the corners of her room, shapes that would vanish the moment she turned to look. We started calling each other at odd hours, all of us struggling with the same eerie sense that we were never alone, even in the safety of our own homes. Then one night, something happened that I still can't explain. I was lying in bed when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Sam. His text was strange, almost unreadable, like he had typed it in a panic. It read, "Come now, I found something. It's calling to me." I jumped out of bed and drove to his place, my heart racing. When I got there, I found Sam in his living room, staring at a map. It was just like the one we'd seen in the captain's quarters on that ship, weathered, faded, with those same strange symbols marking locations across the ocean. And right in the center was a spot circled in dark red ink. A place far out in the ocean, away from any known shipping routes. He looked up at me, his eyes hollow and tired. "It wants us to go there," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "It's not done with us yet." I tried to talk him out of it, but he wouldn't listen. Sarah showed up shortly after, pale and shaking, holding another object from the ship. A compass, old and rusted, with the needle pointing relentlessly toward that same cursed location on the map. We made a pact that night, all three of us. We'd take one last trip, sail to the spot marked on the map, and end whatever curse had followed us. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being led into a trap. The ship wanted us to return, but what would it do to us once we got there? There are moments when I wonder if we've already gone too far, if we've crossed a line that no one is meant to cross. But the whispers don't stop. They keep calling, relentless, insistent, pulling us back to the sea. And now, I can't help but feel that it's watching us. As the day of our departure approached, strange things began happening around us. Shadows seemed darker, longer. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I felt like someone, or something, was watching. My friends felt it too. Sam swore he'd seen figures lurking in the corners of his vision just for a moment before they faded into the shadows. Sarah kept hearing soft, shuffling footsteps outside her door at night. Each morning, we'd talk about these encounters, trying to convince ourselves it was all in our minds. But the signs were too real, too chilling to ignore. Finally, the day came. The three of us stood at the edge of the dock, staring at the boat that would take us back out to sea. None of us spoke as we climbed aboard. It felt different this time, heavier, like we were stepping into something we couldn't escape from. As we left the shore behind, the silence of the open water surrounded us, and I felt a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, as if we were sailing into the unknown depths of a nightmare. The journey to the marked spot was uneventful, almost eerily so. Hours passed, and there wasn't a single ripple in the water, not a single sound apart from our own breathing and the creak of the boat. It was as if the ocean itself was holding its breath, waiting. And then as we drew closer, I saw it, the shadow on the horizon, the same shadow that had haunted our last trip. It was the ship, that ancient, cursed vessel, standing like a specter on the open sea, just as we had left it, as though it had never moved, waiting for our return. We pulled up alongside it, the three of us silent, fear etched across our faces. This time there were no jokes, no excitement, just dread. Reluctantly, we climbed aboard once again, and the instant my feet touched the deck, I felt it, that same chilling cold, that same silence. It was as if the ship had been waiting for us, holding on to its secrets just long enough for us to come back. As we ventured deeper into the ship, it felt alive. The walls groaned, and the air grew thick, almost suffocating. Sam led the way, his flashlight barely piercing the darkness ahead. We passed the crew quarters again, the same journals left open on each bed, the same chilling words staring back at us. No escape. The voices, they're getting louder. Suddenly, Sarah gasped. She had found something. A door we hadn't seen before, barely visible in the shadows. It was slightly ajar, as if beckoning us inside. Against every instinct, we pushed it open. The room was empty, save for a single chair in the center, and on that chair sat a figure, a dark shape, cloaked in shadows, unmoving. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure didn't move, didn't react, but I could feel it watching us, its presence looming, suffocating. And then slowly, it lifted its head, revealing hollow, empty eyes. It didn't speak, but in that silence, I could hear it. A whisper that seemed to fill the room, echoing in my mind. You shouldn't have come back. Before we could react, the door slammed shut behind us, trapping us inside. Panic set in as we pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. The figure remained in its chair, its empty eyes watching us, silent, patient, as if it had all the time in the world. Then, just as suddenly as the door had shut, the figure vanished, leaving us alone in the suffocating darkness. A low rumbling filled the air, and I felt the ship begin to sway, as if it were moving, drifting further into the depths of the ocean, taking us with it. And that's when I realized we weren't on an ordinary ship. We were on a vessel that had crossed over into the unknown, a ship that was bound to the sea forever, taking anyone who dared step aboard with it. They say that once you board the cursed ship, there's no escape, that it takes you deeper and deeper until you're lost forever, becoming part of its haunted crew. And now, it's calling to you too. Tell me, would you still dare to board it? Or do you think you'd be able to resist the whispers of the deep? We were trapped. Every attempt to escape only seemed to tighten the ship's grip on us. The walls closed in, cold and damp, while the sounds of invisible footsteps and low whispers surrounded us. Each step we took was like moving deeper into the jaws of a beast that had been waiting centuries to swallow us whole. Sam tried to lead us back to the deck, his flashlight cutting through the dark. But somehow, the corridors seemed to change around us. It was like the ship itself was shifting, leading us in circles, pulling us deeper into its maze-like interior. Then came the sound, the low, haunting sound of an old bell ringing somewhere in the bowels of the ship. Each chime echoed through the walls, growing louder, more insistent, until it felt like it was right inside my head. I covered my ears, but it was no use. The sound grew and grew until I could barely think, barely breathe. Suddenly, Sarah screamed. Her flashlight had caught something, a message scratched into the wall, deep and desperate. Turn back. But there was nowhere to turn. We were surrounded. Shadows moved in the corners of our vision, flickering like distant flames, then vanishing the moment we looked directly at them. Every now and then we'd catch a glimpse of those hollow eyes staring at us from the shadows, watching, waiting. And then we found ourselves back in the captain's quarters. But this time the room was different. The air was thick with a smell of salt and decay, and the walls were covered in strange, unfamiliar symbols that seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie light. In the center of the room lay the same weathered map, the one that had led us to the cursed spot on the ocean. But now, there were more marks on it, dozens of them, scattered across the map like scars. Each one was a place where someone had disappeared, never to be seen again. Sam stared at the map, his face pale. "This isn't just a ship," he said, voice trembling. "It's a trap. A trap for souls." At that moment, the temperature dropped. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, and when I turned, there was no one there. But I could feel it, a presence, something ancient and malevolent, watching us from the darkness. Suddenly, the whispers rose, filling the room, surrounding us. They were louder now, clearer, and they weren't just whispers. They were pleas, desperate cries for help, voices of the souls who had been trapped on this cursed vessel, doomed to sail the endless ocean for eternity. We tried to run, but the door wouldn't budge. It was as if the ship had sealed itself shut, trapping us inside. I could feel it in my bones. This was it. We had become part of the ship's nightmare, swallowed by its curse, bound to its haunting journey across the ocean. The whispers grew louder, almost frantic, echoing around us in an endless chorus of fear and despair. We could hear footsteps approaching, heavy and slow, getting closer and closer. And then, just as the shadows began to close in, the ship lurched, and we were thrown to the floor. When I came to, I was lying on the shore, the sun rising over the horizon. Sam and Sarah were beside me, unconscious but alive. The ship was gone, vanished as if it had never existed. But we knew it was still out there, somewhere, waiting for its next victims. ready to pull anyone foolish enough to board it into its haunted depths. And ever since that day, I can still hear the whispers, faint but unmistakable, calling to me from across the water. Life after that night was never the same. For weeks, Sam, Sarah, and I tried to shake off the terror we'd felt on that ship. We barely spoke about it, as if saying it aloud would somehow summon it back. But we all knew the truth. Something had changed within each of us. It started small, things that were easy to ignore at first. Sam swore he'd hear waves crashing in his apartment late at night, and the faint sound of a bell tolling, like a ghostly chime drifting from miles out at sea. Sarah started seeing things out of the corner of her eye, shadows flickering and disappearing whenever she turned her head. And as for me, every now and then I'd wake up in the dead of night, cold salt water dripping down my forehead, as if I'd just come up for air from somewhere deep below. But the worst part? The whispers. Those faint, echoing voices we'd heard on the ship never truly left us. They followed us, slipping into our thoughts when we were alone, filling the silence with their endless pleading, like they were reaching out from across the veil, desperate to pull us back. It felt like the cursed souls we'd encountered wanted us to join them, forever adrift in their nightmarish existence. Tell me, have you ever felt that strange pull of the ocean? That deep, almost hypnotic feeling when you stand at the water's edge, looking out at the vast, dark expanse? Have you ever wondered what secrets it's hiding? What horrors lie waiting in the depths? Because I've seen it. And let me warn you, once you step over that edge, there's no coming back. Now, you're probably thinking this could never happen to you. You're probably shaking your head, safe in your room, maybe even laughing at the thought of some ghost ship lurking in the middle of the ocean. But here's a question for you. If you could go out there, if you could board that ship and glimpse the unknown, would you? Could you resist that pull, that whisper calling you across the waves? Because if you're ever near the sea, on some dark, misty night, and you hear a faint bell ringing or see the silhouette of an ancient vessel just on the horizon, remember this story. Remember that there are some places, some things, that are better left in the darkness. Weeks turned to months, and the haunting memories of that night began to blur, fading into something like a distant nightmare. Sam and Sarah did their best to move on, burying themselves in work and pretending that life could go back to normal. But deep down, we all knew better. We knew that some scars, those carved into the soul, never really heal. One evening, months after the ordeal, I decided to return to the coast alone. There was something I couldn't shake, a pull I felt every night, as if the ocean itself was calling me back. The wind was fierce, the waves roaring, and the sky was the color of ash. I stood on the shore, staring out at the churning water, half expecting to see that cursed ship drifting on the horizon, and then in the distance, there it was. A faint glimmer, like a ghostly silhouette of sails against the dark sky, barely visible but unmistakable. The same ship, shrouded in fog, as if waiting for me to return. I knew at that moment that I'd never truly be free. None of us would. That ship had left a mark on me, on Sam and Sarah, on anyone it encountered. It was still out there, and it would always be out there, forever drifting, forever hungry for souls foolish enough to cross its path. With a shudder, I turned and left the shore. But even as I walked away, I could feel its presence, its haunting call echoing in my mind. It was as if the ship itself was alive, waiting to find its next victim. So if you ever find yourself drawn to the sea on a dark, misty night, if you ever hear that faint sound of a bell echoing across the waves, take heed. There are forces out there we'll never understand, ancient and unrelenting, And some mysteries are better left undisturbed. And now, as you sit here, safe in your own home, think about this. Would you dare to face the unknown? Would you board that ship just for a glimpse of what lies beyond? Or would you turn back while you still can? Remember, there are places in this world, lurking in the shadows, that we may stumble upon without ever realizing the danger. So tell me, if you were there, would you stay, or would you run? And now, it's your turn. You've heard the tale of the ghost ship that claimed countless souls. But what would you do if you found yourself face to face with the unknown? Would you take the risk, or would you turn away? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's see who among you has the courage to brave the unknown. If this story gave you chills, make sure to hit that like button to let us know, and share it with anyone you know who loves a good mystery. Who knows? Maybe they'll have their own tale to add to the legend. And if you're ready to explore more haunted mysteries and spine-chilling stories, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Until then, stay curious and be careful where you wander. There are places out there that may just pull you in forever.